Call the meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Good evening. Councilmember Seah?
Here.
Councilmember Rennie?
Here.
Councilmember Spector?
Here.
Vice Mayor Jensen?
Here.
Mayor Leonardis?
Here. I would like to invite forward this time our pledge leader this evening, Ms. Diane Goldberg. She is with the Kiwanis Club of Los Gatos. Come around the back. I'll share with you a few words about Diane, who is one of our consummate volunteers in the community. She's the current president of the Los Gatos Kiwanis Club, one of our service clubs here in town. She was the past secretary of the Kiwanis Club. She's a sponsor for the K-Kids at Louise Van Meter and Blue Hills Elementary Schools. She's also the sponsor for the Builders Club at Fisher Middle School. And K-Kids and Builders Club are versions of Kiwanis Club for younger kids. Younger than Diane and me. Diane is also involved in and responsible for the Hippity Hop Till You Drop Easter egg hunt that we have in Oak Meadow Park every year, and the turnaround scholarship events that we give to the high school students through the Kiwanis Club. Diane also teaches English as a second language weekly. It's a weekly conversational English class. And this is at the Los Gatos Library, so in a way you're volunteering for the town of Los Gatos as well. Thank you for that. Now, you have one big event coming this week with the Kiwanis Club. Can you tell us about that before you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. So this weekend we have the Fiesta de Arts that we'll be having right here at the Civic Center. It's our yearly fundraiser where we make all of our money for our turnaround scholarships, academic scholarships, for giving back to the children of this community. So we hope to see everyone there spending money this weekend.
It'll be a lot of fun as well. So please lead us in the pledge.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
How about a big round of applause for Ms. Diane Goldberg? We'll do one more round of applause for Ms. Goldberg. Thank you for coming in. Next on our agenda this evening is a commendation, and I'm very happy to present this commendation this evening to one of our very appreciated businesses in town. I've been in business a long time. In my limited travels on this earth, I've been fortunate not to find a breakfast place better than this anywhere. And I think this is an incredible institution, and we're just so grateful to have this institution as part of our business community. I would like to invite up the owners of Los Gatos Cafe, and we have here this evening Sheila and Tina. You please come forward. And I have a commendation that I'd like to present to both of you. But I want to just tell a little bit about the story, which I was not aware of until this evening. Both of your significant others started this business many years ago. And I guess when they were in kindergarten, they dreamed of owning a restaurant together. And when they were 22 years old, that's when they opened the Los Gatos Cafe together, which is really cool. And that was back in 1987, downtown. I really love the giant cinnamon rolls at the one uptown, the Los Gatos Cafe uptown. I can't tell you how many of those I've had in my life. And I would like to, at this time, say thank you for your commitment and all your generosity to the community. You've been supporting countless events, such as our service clubs, which we just had, the Kiwanians, the Lions, the Rotary, the Toastmasters, Humane Society, Boys and Girls Clubs, shelters, and our faith institutions. So your generosity has not gone unnoticed. And without any further ado, I'd like to present this to you both. Thank you. And you are? Tina. You are Sheila. Yes. Congratulations. And how about a round of applause? And on behalf of your significant others, would you like to say a few words this evening?
We are humbled by this recognition, and we'd like to say thank you to the whole community for supporting us all these years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we hope to get you back. It's been, it's about 32 years. Maybe in about another 18 or years, we'll do a golden anniversary version of this. So thank you. We wish you many happy returns. Congratulations. Another round of applause, please. Next up is our closed session report. Mr. Schultz, do you have anything for us this evening?
Yes, tonight, council met in closed session before our regular session to discuss real property negotiations. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. Next is our consent calendar, and we have 7 items on our consent calendar. Does any member of the public wish to pull an item, or any member of council wish to pull an item? I see none. We'll go forward with a motion. Vice Mayor?
Move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 7.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none. It passes unanimously. Next, we have our verbal communications. And if any member of the public wishes to speak on an item which is not on our council agenda this evening, please fill out a card that looks like this. We have one card this evening so far, and that is Dale Miller. Will you please come forward?
Dale Miller, 115 Newell Court, Los Gatos. I came to thank you from our neighborhood for over the years, all the things that you've listened to us, our complaints, our concerns, our bitches about everything. Whether it was the corner lot on Larkin Winchester, when it was going to be a skateboard park, a gas refueling station. Now the best solution of all is the county fire goes there. So also for all the help you gave us in the development of the old Elks Club to get 4 houses. They actually have started to put some construction documents together, so hopefully they'll get built over the next couple of years. Most recently, you listened to us about the parking issues on Newell Avenue. And I'm happy to say that the town manager, Ms. Pravetti, and Mr. Morley, the Public Works, came out and listened to about 10 of our neighbors. They came up with some interesting solutions. The good news is instead of 30, 40 cars a day, today there was 5. So thank you all for listening to our concerns. Thank you for the people who came out and listened to our issues and actually resolved it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, and thank you for the compliments. It is so nice to hear the kudos. Thank you to the staff for taking care of that as well. All right, that concludes our verbal communications. We'll move on to our first public hearing this evening, which is item number 8. And item number 8 is a Town Code Amendment, application A19-006, which is townwide. And the applicant is ourselves, the Town of Los Gatos. We're considering an amendment to the Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Parking Assessment District.
Point of order, Mayor, would you like staff to do the report for all 3 ordinances together since there's a kind of a similar genesis and history, or would you prefer to take them one by one?
That is yes. Thank you, Town Manager, for bringing that to my attention. So we will handle the staff report for items 8, 9, and 10 concurrently. And Ms. Shupin, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. The items in front of you are considerations of amendments to Chapter 29 of the zoning code regarding valet parking, parking assessment district regulations, and parking lot improvements as recommended by the Town Council Policy Committee and the Planning Commission. The recommendations propose the following changes: allowing private parking lots outside of the parking assessment district to charge for valet parking, and to modify the deciding body for valet parking permits from the Development Review Committee to the Community Development Director. Modifying the deciding body for parking lot improvements such as restriping or reconfiguration from the Development Review Committee to the Community Development Director. And finally, removing the requirement for a variance application for the removal of on-site parking spaces that are credited in the parking assessment district when the use is changed to a residential use that no longer requires those on-site parking spaces. These changes are intended to streamline the land use process and reduce the cost for businesses and property owners. Should the council wish to move forward with any of the proposed amendments, staff would recommend a separate motion for each of these amendments. This concludes staff's presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Schupman. Questions from council? Seeing none, I have no cards on any of these items, 8, 9, or 10. If anybody wishes to speak, now is your opportunity. Seeing none coming forward, we will go back to council for discussion motion. Vice Mayor.
Okay, so I realize that you want separate motions on each one. As long as I identify that I'm doing that, then that's fine. Okay. So first thing I'd like to do is thank the staff very much for coming forward on the council priority for streamlining various, whatever we can for businesses and property owners to get things through the process faster and more efficiently and more cheaply. And this is part of the product for that. So thank you very much for those efforts. And thank you to fellow Councilmember Spector for helping on the policy committee. With that, my motion is that we approve or actually introduce an ordinance on item number 8, which is attachment 4 to our staff report by title only, which affects an amendment to Chapter 29 of the Town Code regarding parking district regulations. With respect to item number 9, that we introduced an ordinance by title only affecting amendments to Chapter 29 for parking lot improvement regulations as detailed in number 9, or agenda item 9. And with respect to agenda item 10, that we introduce an ordinance by title only affecting amendments to Chapter 29 regarding valet parking regulations.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Sayak? Oh,
I'll second the motion, and just want to extend the thanks. I know this is a list, this adds on to the list of all the improvements we've done to streamline, to allow our businesses and our business districts to improve themselves seamlessly, and so thank the policy committee for that continued work.
motion and a second. Do we have any discussions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes. All three pass unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item. Oh, we have to read the titles on all three.
Ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding parking assessment district regulations. Then item number 9, ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding parking lot improvement regulations. Agenda item number 10, ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding valet parking regulations.
Thank you. Next up is item number 11. The town is considering the pension plan IRS Section 115 trust options to terminate the PARS agreement and direct staff to return to council with an agreement to initiate a CalPERS pre-funding trust. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Council. The item before you is part of the outcome of a meeting that occurred on September 3rd by the Pension and OPEB Oversight Committee. At that committee meeting, that committee gave direction that any additional discretionary payments should be utilized to pay down directly to CalPERS long-term amortizations. Another byproduct of that meeting was, since we will be giving the money directly to CalPERS, there was no need to maintain the PARS account, and we were provided direction to close the PARS account. This body is the body that actually entered into the contract with PARS, so it's appropriate for this body to be the one to decide to terminate it. In addition, staff has brought an additional recommendation, which is to open an account with CalPERS. This option wasn't available when we opened the PARS account. It's new products offered by CalPERS, and it's basically the exact same thing, which is an IRS Section 115 trust. Staff is making this recommendation because this council and previous councils have shown an inclination to want to give additional payments towards pension obligations above and beyond the mandatory contribution amount. With the closure of the PARS account in the future, that means the only available vehicle to hold those monies until there's enough money to pay down another amortization base is currently within the town's general fund operating portfolio. We know that due to the constraints mandated by the state on that portfolio, it's a very low-yielding portfolio. And so the CalPERS accounts that are now being offered as of July kind of offer a nice middle ground where they're lower risk, shorter-term vehicles in the event the council decides if you do want to put additional monies towards paying down additional pension payments, you will have one more option available to you other than just the town's general fund operating portfolio. In addition, the CalPERS account, very similar to the CERBT that we currently have with CalPERS for our OPEB account, it's a very low-cost alternative. There's no setup costs, and there's no fees associated with anything until there are assets in the account. When there are assets in the account, it's a flat rate of 25 basis points, which is significantly cheaper than the PARS product we currently have. And so this recommendation really has two components. It's following on the Pension and OPEB Oversight Committee recommendation to close the PARS account, and then the new suggestion by staff that we consider opening an additional IRS 115 trust with CalPERS in the event that this council wants an alternative in the future to the general fund operating portfolio. And with that, staff's available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Questions? Councilmember Sayak.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. I just want to make sure I understand. So to clarify, the 8.6 that we made a decision on our last meeting, this would not go into this proposed new trust, correct?
That is correct. So the way it was deliberated, the monies that are currently in PARS are the first monies identified to go to CalPERS. There is an additional approximately $3 million that's already in the town's operating portfolio. Staff thinks that having the option to still put monies in a 115 trust is an option that the council may want in the future. And since there's no cost to open the account with CalPERS, and administratively, since we've decided that additional discretionary payments should be directed directly to CalPERS, administratively, it's a very efficient option since it's a product that's also administered by CalPERS.
Further questions? Seeing none, we'll open it up to the public. I have no speaker cards on this item. If anybody wishes to speak, this is your opportunity to do so. Seeing no one coming forward, we'll close the public hearing. We'll go to council for a motion. And I think Mr. Rennie's hand went up first.
I'm going to just start with a question. Are you asking us to choose between the 4% and the 5% choices with CalPERS?
Not at this time, council member. So we're able to just open an account without deciding an asset allocation, and that is a discussion that we would bring back to the Pension and OPEB Oversight Committee at a future time. Right now, we have clear direction on where you want the assets directed. This is just creating another option for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Okay, so I'll try a motion, and the motion is that we agree to terminate the PARS agreement that we currently have in consistent with our last OPEB meeting, and direct staff to return to the council with an agreement to initiate a California Employers Pension Pre-Funding Trust so that we can look at it and at that time decide which of the investment vehicles we want to put money into, if any.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Spector.
First of all, thank you to Mr. Andrews for a very clear explanation, and with that, I will second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Andrews. We will be moving on to, at this point in time, our council and manager matters portion of the program, because a couple of our council members will be recusing themselves from the next hearing, so they get to leave after this part. And we will start with Councilmember Sayoc.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 3 items to report. The first is just that, as an email that I sent to you, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy approved their EV infrastructure plan, and the details are forwarded to each of your emails. Cities Association met, and we discussed the upcoming RENA allocation and methodology that ABAG is working on, and how that affects our subgroup that Ms. Pravetti is currently a member of. And the League of Cities is partnering with the League of Women Voters for a candidate forum for Jerry Hill's seat, and that is September 25. And so if anyone is interested in attending, we could ask Jeanette to put that on your calendars.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The West Valley Clean Water Authority and the West Valley, I lost my notes. Anyway, the 2 West Valley, that is not collection and recycling. Anyway, the 2 of the organizations met, and there was nothing that occurred that I would report out on, with the exception that I anticipate at our next meeting, we will be considering and bringing forward to council at some point a request to increase the rates for our garbage collection because of the changes in the policies in China as they relate to recycling the recyclables.
Thank you, Councilmember Spector. Since our last regular meeting, I attended the West Valley Sanitation District Board of Directors meeting, and nothing to report there. I also attended the Treatment Plant Advisory Committee meeting in San Jose. I have nothing significant to report there. I attended an event which was the Shaded Fuel Break Kickoff. It was covered in the media. This is very important. They're clearing vegetation along Highway 17 to make our fire escape routes safer, and there was some money handed down from the governor's office to do this, so we're very grateful for that, and it was a very well attended and very well received event. Last but not least, on Friday, I attended an event called Hooked. It's about vaping and how it is affecting our communities. And we will be bringing, at a future date, the near future, a revised smoking ordinance forward. I hope that may address some of the concerns with vaping in our society. Vice Mayor.
I have nothing to report.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. On 9/5, I attended the VTA board meeting. As I reported from the Capital Programs Committee, the board went ahead and also approved the putting on hold of Vasona Light Rail extension and any improvements to the existing line. Many other things. That was one of most interest to us. Also on 9/10, I attended at our chamber the service providers meeting. Mr. Andrews was there also. There was a very good presentation from the county by somebody named Vanessa about senior food anxiety. And I was surprised to hear that Santa Clara County is third in the nation for the highest percentages of seniors that have concerns about getting enough to eat. They also have a pet food donation for seniors. So they have centers for seniors that can get food, and they also can get food for their pets. And one story that Vanessa told that struck me was there was a gentleman that had joined their program and was getting food donations, and after he'd been in the program a little while, he brought in a case of dog food to donate to the pet give out, and they said to him, "Well, why are you donating? You're a member of it." And he said, "Now that I'm on your program, I don't need to eat this anymore." So it was very moving story for me. I wanted to share that. Also on 9/12, I attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Risk Oversight Committee, and Councilmember Sayoc, also when she attended the Cities Association Selection Committee, she informed me that I was reappointed to the Emergency Operating Area Council for the county. I'm currently the vice chair for that. So the Cities Association gets to appoint the various people from the different areas. So I represent West Valley and South County on that. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. Ms. Pravetti.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 3 items to report. Tomorrow, the Arts and Culture Commission is meeting in these chambers at 4 o'clock to hear the 3 final proposals for a median gateway art exhibit. The public is welcome. Those exhibits will also be on display in the public library for others to provide comment on. Second, we are doing Screen on the Green this Friday. We're showing Incredibles 2. Should be a lot of fun at Oak Meadow Park, and the screen time is at 7:30. And finally, we are starting to collect applications for our boards and commissions. Information is available on the town website. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, before we move on to item number 12, we have a couple council members who get to go home. Mr. Schultz, will you tell us how the process works?
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. So prior to tonight's agenda item, we have to deal with an issue that has been going on for about 9 months and the analysis that needed to be done under the Political Reform Act. The Political Reform Act deals with conflict of interest that prohibit a council member from taking part in any governmental decision if it's reasonably foreseeable that that decision will have a material effect on their financial interest. Mayor Leonardis, Councilmember Sayoc, and Councilmember Spector all own real property defined as historical structures under our town code. Councilmember Rennie owns real property within the historical district and within 250 feet of historical property, but his property is not considered an historical structure under our town code. My legal analysis concluded that the Mayor Leonardis and Councilmembers Sayoc, Spector, and Rennie all have a conflict of interest under the Political Reform Act. I requested an opinion letter from the Fair Political Practice Act, and they agreed with my analysis that the 4 have a conflict of interest under the Political Reform Act. The Political Reform Act does allow a council member who is otherwise disqualified to participate in a government decision and allows them to participate what is called legally required. This typically is the exception that is used when you can't form a quorum. In this case, we have 5 council members. 3 members constitutes a quorum. Since 4 of the 5 council members have a conflict of interest under the Act, the rule of legally required has been put into place, and the Fair Political Practice Act is in agreement with that. Accordingly, the 4 disqualified council members have participated in a random selection process to choose which 2 officials can participate in the decision to create a quorum. Mayor Leonardis and Councilmember Sayoc were randomly selected to participate in this agenda item, so Councilmember Spector and Rennie will now be excused and leave the room.
Now that the door has closed, we can begin our discussion. So we will begin with our item number 12. Staff recommends that the council discuss and provide direction on whether staff should draft a Mills Act ordinance and implementation program. Mr. Schultz.
The Mills Act is a state law that grants local governments the authority to establish, administer, and implement a Mills Historical Preservation Tax Relief Program to encourage the preservation of historical buildings. Cities and counties with the Mills Act programs can enter into contracts with owners of qualified historical properties who actively participate in the preservation, restoration, and maintenance of their historical properties while potentially receiving property tax relief. The town is fortunate in that its citizens take pride in improving and maintaining their properties. In addition, we already have a historical preservation ordinance. We have design guidelines that further protect historical structures and promote an excellence in design. Therefore, the town does not have the same challenges as other jurisdictions in encouraging the upkeep and improvement of historical properties. However, if the town council decides to establish a Mills Act program, there are many different aspects that would need to be considered. The council would need to adopt an enabling ordinance, an implementation program. The council would need to adopt its own criteria for establishing qualified historical properties. The town council would need to develop an application process and determine how many contracts it will allow. The council would also have to develop approval, monitoring, and inspection processes for each individual contract to ensure the owner complies with their contract, and if in fact, whether there would be penalties if there is any violations of their contracts. It is important to understand that the Mills Act contract provides only the potential for tax property reduction. It is not a guarantee. Each property varies according to its income generating potential and current assessed value. Attached to the staff report is various scenarios of potential property valuations under the Mills Act property savings at properties assessed at $450,000 to $3 million. There are very conservative assumptions that are made in those, and each property would be differently assessed as to what their square footage was, what was the potential value of it, but staff use very conservative figures to try to give you an example. Based on those figures, if an assessed value was anywhere under $450,000, there'd be absolutely no property taxes, and not until you reach well above that amount do you start to begin to receive any property tax savings. Therefore, longtime owners who have Prop 13 benefits would not be expected to experience any savings. The Town Council decided in January 2019 not to include this topic as a priority and goal or as an ordinance for the town attorney to work on. Due to public comment at the subsequent council meetings, the mayor requested this item be placed on the agenda. Therefore, this report provides only a brief overview of the Mills Act. The town staff has not done any fiscal impact of a Mills Act ordinance on the town. We do, however, believe that it might be very minimal depending on how many contracts and which contracts were let. And I think I state in my staff report, many towns cap what the assessed value could be at $1.5 million, so there isn't as much of a fiscal impact. What is not in the staff report is also what we have not done is reach out to the other public agencies that also would suffer consequences. Although we receive just a small percentage of that 1.2%, there's also the Los Gatos-Saratoga High School District that would be affected, the Elementary Union School District, the Central Fire District, the Santa Clara County, the Mid-Penn. So there are many other agencies that also could be affected by a Mills Act ordinance that we did not do that fiscal analysis of. Due to the FPP's conflict of interest I just went over with 4 or 5 of the council members, there's only 3 of you that are hearing this item. Since ordinance adoption requires 3 votes, all 3 council members must unanimously agree to move forward with the future consideration of a Mills Act ordinance and associated implementation program. As an alternative to the Mills Act, the Town Council could consider other historical preservation options as future strategic priorities, such as the review of our existing code and guidelines, additional historical surveys that the town could do, and inventory work or similar items. I'm here to answer any questions. So is the town manager, and so is the town planning manager. Both of them have extensive experience with Mills Acts and other jurisdictions.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Vice Mayor.
Just a couple of preliminary questions. Thank you very much for your report. I understand from what you've told us that in order for us to take any action, whether that be a complete rejection or a direction to move forward, we must have a unanimous vote among the 3 of us, correct?
No, not for a rejection.
Not for rejection, okay.
Could be 2 to 1.
And if there is a unanimous vote to go forward, assuming the composition of the council remains the same and 4 are conflicted, in going forward with any kind of implementation procedure, an ordinance, a selection of how many contracts, establishment of criteria, et cetera, does that also have to come before 3 council members? And is it the same as tonight, or does it vary?
No, it won't vary.
every time?
You will hear, these 3 would hear it unless, of course.
And on each occasion, would it have to be a unanimous vote to go forward?
Yes, because the ordinance, the first implementing document would be the ordinance. That would definitely have to be a 3-0 to implement the ordinance. As for the program, that's a very good question. The program itself could probably be implemented 2-1. So for example, your very first implementing ordinance is just fairly simple. And it is not that complicated just for the Mills Act to put it in your ordinance. The program is where most of your difficult questions are asked, and that could be answered with a 2-1 vote because that's not an ordinance. So it's really the implementing ordinance that would require a 3-0 vote.
Really? Okay. I'm surprised by your answer. And particularly because if you're conflicted because you stand to benefit because you own a historical property, your benefit may be dependent upon how many contracts are let, what the criteria for the contract is, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just expressing surprise at your answer. My other question is that if the three here were to determine that they hypothetically want to go forward with looking at our current historical standards, as you mentioned at the end of your report, I'm assuming that because that's townwide and it has to do with where they don't have a direct fiscal impact, could be heard by the entire council.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sayoc.
Thank you, Mayor. I have several process-related questions. The first, you mentioned that the recipients of revenue that may be affected by this, you listed several. I'm assuming that because we haven't even made a decision whether to move forward, that we haven't shared much information. But I'm just curious, are there any regulatory rules on what type of, how do we share that information? Just through normal, this is what we're about to do? Is there a formal mechanism, since it really does affect their budgetary concerns? And so I want to better understand how that moves forward.
We would reach out to each one of them as stakeholders and reach out to them as to what their comments were and inform them of every hearing that went forward so that they could participate in those before the ordinance was enacted.
And just like any stakeholder, they can weigh in on criteria and any
Correct.
other enabling ordinance that we were to work on.
Correct.
And then if I may, my second, what you listed, the amount of work that's necessary to even begin a program requires significant staff work. And so walk me through, should this body decide to move forward, I assume there's a certain amount of work that staff would need to do. And so would we just be putting this onto January's discussion of priorities given other programs, or this somehow gets put in? Can you just walk me through how this works in relation to all the other priorities we've already identified?
Correct. We have a lot of priorities. The ordinance list itself has, 10 to 15 ordinances that we're slowly working our way through. Tonight's work on streamlining was fabulous, so thank you. But there's a lot of other things that council has already identified as ongoing commitments and new ordinances. So we would then return in January with the Mills Act, similar to the arts fee that we discussed at our last meeting. We're not going to be bringing forward that ordinance in the immediate future. It would be added to the list, and then you would be able to sort and prioritize along with all of the other ordinance work.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz, quick question. So you mentioned that actually crafting an ordinance wouldn't be that extensive, the language of an ordinance just to adopt the Mills Act, but you said all the, of course, staff work and policies and procedures behind that obviously is more involved. So would it be possible, if this council saw fit to adopt going forward, to draft an ordinance saying that the town will do the Mills Act and then do all that other work later?
No, because staff wouldn't be able to have the direction on how to implement that program. There is just so many, what's the requirement, what's the application process? So really, the actual programming is your implementation document. It's the same as we have a BMP ordinance that says, we want to collect BMPs from properties, but really it's those BMP guidelines that are 15, 20, 30 pages long. That is the implementation program. So you couldn't just put an ordinance saying that you have a BMP program without having that program implemented. So you wouldn't be able to bring the ordinance forward to you until your program documents are done.
Okay, thank you for clarification on that.
And that's where it comes in, that question before. I mean, while you work through the implementation program document, by law, that doesn't require 3 people as an ordinance does. That's a whole different government code as opposed to a conflict of interest. So they really have to go hand in hand, because if one of you does not agree with the programming for it, it certainly isn't going to vote for the ordinance. So you're not going to get your 3 votes. So that's why it's important from the beginning to have 3 votes to move forward. Otherwise, staff is wasting its time.
Okay, thank you for clarification. Any more discussion? Seeing none, we'll open up the public hearing on this. If you have not filled out a card, please do so. I have several cards here. The first speaker is Jeff Siegel.
Does this work? Ah. That technical degree of yours, are. They're really fabulous slides. You should see them. Oh, you can go one more. Okay. Great. Well, it's great to be here before you. I think we first started this conversation at the beginning of the calendar year, so it's good to see us come full circle. And since the time when we last got together, there's been a lot of market research done, a lot of data collection. A 2019 historic survey was done, which is the first survey in 28 years since the last one was done. So we have a clear and clean snapshot of reality versus what maybe perception might be of what reality would look like to some. Let's start with this central thought, which is a truth. Most homeowners cannot get the job of historic preservation done all by themselves. Local governments need to become an active partner in achieving that aim. As we're going to see in the data we're going to share in a moment, we're not even close to achieving that aim today. This is why 100+ towns throughout the state of California have adopted the Mills Act. It is a private-public partnership. It is the town working hand in hand with the homeowners with the goal of historic preservation and the value that brings to the town as well. And I should direct you to another piece of information that you would have received in your packet that shows that in this last calendar year alone, construction costs have gone up 20%. So if you're an owner of a historic home and you think it was hard before to find the money to preserve your house, good luck trying to do that now in this economic climate. So what this slide shows, and this is something that has been proven across the state and through well over 1,000 historic towns across the country, is that historic preservation does not happen effectively without economic incentives. If you have the economic incentives, those goals can be achieved. Without it, what you end up is with historic loss. And that's exactly what we have in this town right now. So these sentiments about the importance of this private-public partnership are shared by a lot of people throughout our community, in both there as well as by a lot of residents that are in historic neighborhoods. Many of these don't even own historic homes, but they see the value to the neighborhood. So decaying homes lead to vanishing homes, and that's exactly what we have seen in a great deal of that. The town code that we have today says that this is not.
Mr. Siegel, your time is up. If you could just finish your sentence.
Yeah, the key thought there is our town code today says that preservation is a priority. I've heard from this council in the past that it isn't a priority, that the Mills Act is not a priority, that historic preservation obviously isn't a priority, but the town code says that it is. So the question is, what are we going to do to begin to take that seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. We have questions for Mr. Siegel. Seeing none, we'll go with the next speaker, which is George Walls.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to address council tonight. So Jeff had talked about the problem of decaying homes and vanishing homes and acknowledged that there is a town council ordinance that exists today that says we need to preserve. There's also one that talks about a duty to keep in good repair. So some of these are in place, and yet homes are decaying. So I ask you, does this look like homes in good repair? Or does it look perhaps like homes that are at risk? If we look at another example, these are homes in Los Gatos. You know, Los Gatos has a lot of charm. Los Gatos is known for its charm. Part of that is its historic homes. It's a benefit to the entire community. Lose the homes, lose the charm. So they're decaying, and once they decay sufficiently, the strategy is scrape and build. They're vanishing, and that's happening even today. Jeff mentioned the historic home survey that was recently recommissioned, and it shows that from 1991 to 2019, there's a loss of 53 homes. We can never get these back. And we're losing 5+ a year. We've lost 5 this year already. So if you look at the inventory and what's happening, it's a downhill slide. Project that into the future. Under today's situation, today's circumstance, today's town code, and we have a bigger problem. So you may say, well, what are some of the forces that are holding us back? Okay, the tax reform limited the state and local tax deductions. We're all pretty much aware of that. Jeffrey mentioned the increasing cost. And maintaining a historic home cost per square foot quite a bit more than a newer home. Today, there's not economic incentives. In fact, it's economically better to just scrape and rebuild. This is a headline that appeared some years ago, but Campbell's not the only town. Here's a couple of other towns you might be familiar with. A couple more. I noticed Saratoga's on this list, and they overlap with some of the jurisdictions you mentioned, so they're, I'm sure, well aware of this. And a couple of more. I think with all of these towns having implemented this, I mean, it sounds like a lot of work to implement, but there are pioneers that have gone before, and I'm sure they'd be happy to help share ideas and methods. So
we have a question from Councilmember Sayoc for you.
yes, ma'am.
Actually, if it's okay, Mayor, I have several. Right now on the slide that you have in front of us, California towns received well over $1 billion. Is it the towns themselves or the residents within the towns?
So it's the residents within the towns have received money to upgrade, rehabilitate historic homes.
Okay. And then my other question, this survey that you mentioned that was recommissioned, who recommissioned the survey?
So I'm going to ask Jeff to help out with that question, if he may.
And if you could just, this is being taped, so if you can repeat that in the the microphone?
Sure. The study was commissioned by the Los Gatos Historical Society.
And so I'm curious, the factors that were used years ago when it did its original study are the same factors that were used? Because you're comparing, what are you comparing? Are the parameters still the same? I'm curious in the survey.
And updated.
So, Mr. Walls, we have to just get the answer from you, and if you don't know the answer, then perhaps one of the other speakers might know the answer.
Sure.
But you cannot engage the audience.
Oh, can he come up or?
No, his
it's a
time
future
is
speaker?
done.
Oh,
We have very
okay.
strict rules about that, so I just want to
Understand.
clarify that. So, Vice Mayor?
Other questions?
Okay, I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Sayak's question about the $1 billion you have on the slide here.
Yes.
So you said it goes to individual property owners. If I own a historic property, what happens under the Mills Act is I get a tax break, correct?
Exactly.
And I do not now pay my full amount of property taxes because I've contracted to be under this act, correct?
Correct.
So those billions of dollars, one could argue, are billions of dollars that are not going into property taxes for the town, the schools, the open space, the whatever it is. Because they're coming out of property tax revenues.
Yeah, those are coming out of future revenues where the homeowner has invested $1 billion or more today, and then that's offset with future reductions in property taxes
For the homeowner.
for the homeowner.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Or the business, yeah.
Councilmember Sayak?
So I want to, again, this slide, and you're the lucky one in that you landed on this one. So there is no state funding that comes directly to the town for preservation funding. Like because if we were to enact the Mills Act, we don't assume then that the state gives additional funding for preservation funding.
So we do have a financial analysis, and it's probably better to look at that. But the answer to your question is, yeah, the state does not directly give money to Los Gatos. It is a forgiveness of property taxes that, moving forward, that affects all of the state revenues and then the sharing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halls. We will move on to
Okay.
Stuart Huizenga. Stuart will be followed by Dave Fulton.
I am Stuart Huizenga, and I'm actually going to forward to, I thought it might be helpful for you to look at an analysis that I put together to try to help frame sort of the financial impact of a Mills Act. And so, sorry
Are
for
we
the
able to blow this up?
Yeah, sorry for the eye chart
Zoom in
here.
on the numbers a little bit. And if you, okay.
All right.
It's okay.
I'll try to do my best to paint a picture. What I started with is the median home price of a Los Gatos home at $1,881,000 is the median home price in our town. Used a property tax rate of 1.2%, which yields a average property tax on a home in Los Gatos of $22,600 roughly per year. On average, from some study that I did, about 50% is the tax break on the Mills Act. So the average tax reduction per home would be about $11,000 a year. Just as an example, I just did every 10 homes. So if you multiply that by 10, you're talking about $113,000 a year in property tax lost to the town for 10 homes. Total property tax break. To the town, it would be 9.3% of that. So the town's take of the property taxes is 9.3%. And so 10 homes, the impact on the town's budget would be $10,500 for 10 homes per year. And just to put that in context, if you go back and look at the town's budgets going back 7 years, the property taxes, just the town's portion of the property taxes that have come to the town's benefit have increased on average $1.2 million per year in the last 7 years and are now at $16 million. They were $7.5 million 7 years ago. But that 9.3% take that the town gets has increased $1.2 million annually. And so the impact of 10 homes would be roughly $11,000 compared to an annual increase of $1.2 million. So this is, I'm just talking about the tax lost to the town, and it pales in comparison to the increases we've been seeing annually in the town budget coming from property taxes. But this is just the tax loss. A University of San Diego study shows that there's actually a net benefit to the town because the houses within 500 feet of a Mills Act home appreciate well in excess of the lost property taxes on a single home that is getting the Mills Act applied to it. And that's the reason why there are, some had to recuse themselves tonight because, as was pointed out, the houses within 500 feet of the Mills Act home get appreciation well in excess of that one home.
Okay, so we have a question for you from Councilmember Sayoc.
Thank you. And thanks for putting that example, using that and putting it in context. So the question, the 11,000 of loss to the town, were you able then to figure out how much the school districts would lose, the fire department,
Sure.
and all that? So my concern is we also need to be mindful of all the others that are dependent on this revenue.
Sure.
And so what is the amount that we're looking at for them?
So the school districts, if you add the high schools as well as the rest of the school district, it's about roughly 41% of property taxes go to the schools. And so you would actually pretty much take every number that I did here and multiply it by 4. So the town gets 10%, the schools get about 40%. And so the lost property taxes to the schools would be about 4 times that 11,000, so 44,000 a year. But the schools are also getting 4 times that annual property tax increase that the town has been seeing.
Okay.
So that 1.2 million would actually be 4.8 million that the schools are getting the benefit of each and every year. It's going up by 4.8 million, and the schools are losing 44,000 in my example in comparison to that annual increase.
Okay. And then my follow-up question to that, I know several of you have been very active in just sharing the statistics within our community. And I'm curious if you or others that you know of have had that same conversation with the school districts and the fire districts, because we are about to embark on this if this should move forward. And so I'm curious what kind of conversations you've had and what kind of reception you've gotten.
Have not had that conversation, but I would reiterate that the university study did conclude that it's a net positive benefit. The schools aren't losing money. They're actually going to, in the long run, make money off of this program because the increase in property taxes to all the surrounding properties around a Mills Act home more than offset the lost taxes from the Mills Act home itself. And therefore, it's actually a net benefit. The San Diego study was 800 Mills Act homes in 2008, and they concluded that it was a net benefit after the tax loss, but gaining taxes from surrounding properties more than offset it, $14,000 per home. So if you look at the study that was pointed to in causing a conflict of interest because of this benefit, if you read that closely, the bottom line conclusion is that the Mills Act actually is a net positive financial benefit to the town and to the schools.
I have one more follow-up. And again, you happen to be on the hot seat at this time. My understanding, though, is we can't make an assumption that every homeowner can receive this because there are certain criteria, and depending on when you actually purchase your home and what your property taxes are, that weighs heavily into this. So really, my understanding, and you can correct me, is that if you have a certain tax bill or if you've owned it recently, but those that have been purchased before Prop 13, the benefit to them would not be as large as we would think.
That's correct. If you're already benefiting from lower property taxes because of Prop 13, this may not apply to you. But if your concern is about the fire departments and the schools getting less money after the Mills Act is passed, I don't think that is a concern that you should have, in that the study that is being used by the town to conclude that the benefit could potentially cause a conflict of interest, they're computing a positive impact on the fire departments and for the schools, that the property taxes for the surrounding area of the city or surrounding a Mills Act home is going to offset the lost revenue on one Mills Act house. They've calculated within 500, if the homes within 500 feet of that Mills Act home are going to appreciate in excess of the lost property tax revenue on that one Mills Act home.
Okay.
And so they're calling it a net benefit because you're going to be collecting more property taxes on the appreciating homes around that Mills Act home that will be in excess of what you lose on that one house.
Vice Mayor.
I want to follow up on Councilwoman Sayak's questions and your argument. So hypothetically, if I have a house in Los Gatos that's in a historic district and I've owned it for 30 years, my property taxes under Proposition 13 are limited in appreciation to I think it's 1 or 2% a year. And staff will correct me at some point. But anyway, I think it's 2% in the assessed value. So even if my house goes up in value from Mills Act, my property tax is limited under Proposition 13 to an increase that's less than what the break is. So by your chart, you're saying you get a 50% break off. So I already own my house for 30 years. My property tax is already down here because of 13. So if you say my property is going to appreciate, that tax doesn't go up until that house turns over.
Well,
so as long as that house isn't sold, isn't it a loss to the town?
Yeah, well, the study was done in 2008 in San Diego in neighborhoods that were part of Prop 13. I mean, this is 2008. It wasn't that long ago that the study was done.
So
and
does
so
this-
that dynamic that you're talking about was there.
Did the study take into account whether there was a sale? Because for the property tax to change over that limitation on the increment, there has to be a transaction.
I don't know the details of that piece, but I would presume that there would have been some sales that would be part of that benefit that we're talking about, as well as non-Prop 13 protected homes that would be appreciating in value, and therefore the property taxes increasing
So
more
I
than.
guess my problem with that is you're always protected under Proposition 13. You're just protected at different levels depending upon when you
Right.
acquired the house.
But I guess my point is that the study was done in a Prop 13 environment. The study was done pretty recently, 2008. And so similar dynamic would apply in San Diego. It was actually a fairly extensive study. They're the largest Mills Act city in California. They now have over 1,000 homes in the Mills Act there. At the time, there was 800 plus homes in the study. It's pretty extensive. It's not like 10 homes or 20 homes. It's a very extensive number of homes. And so I would expect that these dynamics, it's a broad study. It's not just a pinpoint, cherry picking 10 homes here and 10 homes there and Prop 13, what that impact might be.
Okay, Mr. Huizenga, I have a question for you. So there's been a lot of discussion on single-family homes and how if somebody benefits by a tax break from the state of California to invest money into their single-family home and say it's the one house on the street, or maybe there's a couple of them that need repair, as the slides depicted, it would bring that house up, therefore it would bring up the whole neighborhood, and potentially there would be more taxes for the state of California, which would more than make up for the discount that the original homeowner who fixed up their house was getting. But there has not been discussion about commercial buildings. So if you look at the downtown of Los Gatos, we have a lot of historical buildings. Is the Mills Act applicable to commercial historical buildings? And I'm going to ask you part two, if there was tax incentives for those commercial buildings to invest more money into keeping their buildings maintained and brought up and redone, would that not present the opportunity to bring up the whole value of the property tax basis, which would potentially increase property taxes across the board for the whole town?
The answer is yes. A Mills Act could be adopted inclusive of commercial properties. I would assume the same benefits that you're describing if that were to happen. I think those of us who are up here talking about this tonight thought that it might complicate matters to try to, to add that to the discussion, and so we thought it might be a bite-sized thing to do to start with residential. but this town could certainly decide to include commercial. Other Mills Act programs include commercial properties. In studying this, you'll see maybe a town that has 30 homes or 40 homes, and then maybe 1 or 2 commercial properties involved in the program. So I know that there's other cities in California that have included commercial.
Okay, thank you for that. Any more questions? Thank you, Mr. Huizenga. The next speaker, Paul Fulton, followed by Bob Braham.
This isn't, if you could forward it. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Council. I think one way to look at this is a rare opportunity to make an investment in homes. So although some of us own homes, we really don't own these homes. These homes are going to carry on way past when we're gone, way past when people buy these homes. So yes, we have Prop 13 on some of these homes, and this Mills Act doesn't particularly help them. But they eventually will be sold, and when it gets sold, the problem is, are you going to have homes that are going to be destroyed because it's cheaper to destroy that home? Or are you going to make an investment to be able to make these homes look better like these? Which would you rather vote for? The bottom one, which is nice, or the top one, which is bad? Net positive income in San Diego, and 40, 80, 120 other cities, I believe, within the state have already done this. Sereno, Saratoga, Campbell, San Jose, San Francisco. It's, I think, time for us to make an investment in these homes. We do make investment in parks and in police and all these other things, but this is a time that we can preserve what's really good about our town, which is our quaint homes, our quaint businesses, and it's an opportunity for us. If we look at this, we currently have in our code reasons for homeowners to fix up their homes, but frankly, it's not working. We've lost 16% of our homes already. This is going to accelerate and almost double if we don't do anything. The problem is sticks don't really work too well. What we need is carrots. If we have an opportunity to provide incentive to homeowners, maybe new homeowners or homeowners who are buying these homes that have a decision, am I going to destroy this home, tear it down, or if I'm going to build this home up and make it a historic, preserved home, and all the cost that that requires with extra paint and windows and all those things that old homes take. This is that opportunity to do this. Now we have in our staff somebody who's already done this before, Sally, I believe, I don't know if she's here, but we know how to do this. It's an incentive that can help these homeowners do this. It's a public-private partnership. I think it's time to do it. And I ask that you vote yes on this.
Thank you. We have questions for Mr. Fulton. Seeing none, Bob Braham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to use slides. I'm going to go a cappella on this. As I was listening, Councilmember Sayoc and Vice Mayor Jensen, you asked some really good questions about the heart of the matter and the cost, the trade-offs, the ongoing requirements to vote through various gates. I'm just a simple resident. I don't know what all that's about. All I know is we've lived here for 25 years. My wife and I came here a little less than that ago to this very council to get our remodel done, and we continue to maintain a home. In fact, I remember, I think Barbara was part of the town council at the time. Here in 2019, it's a high-stakes poker game. I don't have a historic home. I'm one of the rare few who can afford to do it and maintain the house. But as we have more people moving to the community, it is a high-stakes poker game, and it's tough. We can't help everybody. We can only help a small portion with this act. But, you know, the proverbial story about the starfish on the ocean, with the young boys walking and throwing starfish back in the ocean, the old man says, what are you doing? You can't save all these starfish. Boy picks up one, throws it back in the ocean. I can save that one. That's what I feel this act can do. So if we can find a way to work through the detail, you're closer to it than I am, I think we can save a few starfish and help some people, you know, be able to live, prosper here in Los Gatos. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Vicky Huizenga, followed by Catherine Summers.
So I wanted to first say, thanks for the parklets. They are great. Busy all the time, people playing chess, hanging out. It's really nice. Good idea.
So Vicki, if you could
Okay.
bring that microphone
Oh,
closer
okay.
to you.
I actually yell quite often, so it probably can hear me. Okay, so I read the staff report included in the council agenda, and I wanted to note a few things. In the discussion section, paragraph 1, the town does not have the same challenges as other localities because the Los Gatos Historic Preservation Ordinances and design guidelines protect historical structures and promote the excellence in design expected by the public. And yes, and expected by the public, I've focused on it's for the public benefit. But what isn't mentioned is whose cost. Then in paragraph 3 and 4, they discuss the need to develop the processes, application process, approval process, monitoring process, inspection process. But remember that the program's been around for 47 years. There are many best practice cities out there we can piggyback off of. The Office of Historic Preservation has a list of them. I've been told Campbell has a great program. Let's talk to them. Paragraph 7 mentions the property valuation cap of $1.5 million. Los Gatos has a median home price of $1.9. I know that Beverly Hills program has a cap of $7.5. So it can be tailored to suit Los Gatos. We know the town cares about historic preservation by the way we enforce our historic preservation ordinance and design guidelines when people remodel their homes. Some homeowners may not be affected by the added time and expense this brings, but others feel the pinch of the loss of the property tax deduction and the limiting of the mortgage interest deduction, and they would very much appreciate the economic incentives of a Mills Act program. Please be aware that there is a disconnect in our enforcing strict preservation ordinances and design guidelines on residents, but not allowing any economic incentive program that could be a game changer for those who own or are considering buying a historic home in need of restoration here. We can't have it both ways. If we won't allow economic incentives, then we should relax the preservation ordinance and design guidelines. We can't have our cake and eat it too, and we have to stop kidding ourselves. If we don't proceed with the Mills Act program honoring, then we are no longer honoring the spirit of historic preservation here. And I just wanted to let you know also, we don't have to do it by ordinance. When I had that conversation with Shannon Lochner at the Office of Historic Preservation, she said that this is
You can finish your sentence.
Okay, adopting an ordinance can be a long process, and most local governments do not opt for a standalone Mills Act ordinance. Clearly written administrative guidelines are more expeditious, so if saving staff time is important, that sounds like the way to go. Okay, that was it.
We have a question from Councilmember Sayak.
So the latter alternative that you just shared with us, guidelines, administrative guidelines, did she give cities as examples that we can emulate?
Yeah, she did.
Do you mind sharing those with me?
Yeah, I will. I can forward you an email, and I've got a telephone conversation notes. Let's see.
Ms. Huizenga, if you could move the microphone so you
Okay.
get on the television.
Yeah, so she is full, she's a great resource.
Okay. So I guess at some point, we'll ask staff to reach out and get more information.
Vice Mayor?
I'm sorry, Shannon works for who?
She is the Mills Act and CLG rep for the Office of Historic Preservation, California's Office of Historic Preservation.
Thank you.
No further questions, thank you.
Okay.
Catherine Summers, followed by Maureen Kapin-Jave.
Good evening, Council. Thanks to staff and to the Council for having this discussion on the Mills Act. I've worked closely with this group of individuals who are pushing for you to put this act into action, and I think we would be foolish not to adopt it. I've weighed the pros and cons and researched a lot of these other towns and how the act has helped those small towns. I've gone to a lot of my go-to sites, Strong Towns and Main Streets USA, and all are highly in favor of adopting this act. It's true it does not directly affect or benefit everyone, but the argument is that it does actually impact everyone eventually over time. Some might argue that its benefits are really for the wealthy property owners here, and that not everyone qualifies because of the tax brackets, et cetera, et cetera. We discussed that, but I do think it has a long-lasting effect. The town might lose a few property tax dollars, some staff times required. We can ask Sally about how much that is. But what is the alternative? We cannot afford to lose the history of our town. I think we did talk a little bit about the commercial properties. I wanted to really bring that up tonight. We discussed how it affects residential properties. My staff did a little bit of investigative research and found that there are, in fact, 40 commercial properties pre-1941 in the downtown core. Not all of these property owners would benefit precisely because of the same reasons that we discussed in the tax benefits and if they owned them before 1972 and Prop 13. However, I have reached out to some of these property owners and they are very in favor of it. And one that I wanted to bring up, which is just really kind of highlights the example, is the building that has the green tiles. It's the old Greyhound bus depot, actually. And I've talked to that property owner, a gentleman who and he bought it actually about 11 years ago, I believe. So he does qualify for all of these benefits. He's asked how much, he's gone through all the process of redoing the facade on that building. And it's about $75,000 to redo that tile. He right now wants to scrap it. He actually hopes that maybe a couple tiles fall down on the street and hit somebody, and then it's going to be a hazard, and he'll take it down. Those are the buildings, I think, that we really need to look at to see, like, would we rather that be preserved and save the integrity of the, and the history in our town, and this would truly benefit somebody like him. You can use this money for facade redos, you can use it for landscaping, you can use it for awnings, you can really reinvest that money into the preservation and the beautification of the town and to keep it kind of the way that we'd like to see it.
All right, thank you. And questions? We have no questions for you, thank you. Maureen Coppin-Jave.
Hi, good evening, council members. I'm Maureen Caponjavi, and I heard about this recently. I didn't know this was a discussion within the council, and so I was really excited to know that the Mills Act is up for debate again. I'm a homeowner. I own an old home in Los Gatos, and purchased it in 2005, and it's an old home. It's old. And we love it, and we bought it because and when we bought it, it was in rough shape. It was the roughest house in the neighborhood, in a nice neighborhood, and we thought, oh, it's got great bones, we love it, we're gonna do it. And foolishly, we bought it, and foolishly now, for 15 years, we've been sinking every dime into that house. I mean, we look at, should we go on vacation? No, we gotta, we're gonna fix the tile, and every time we do it, we shine a little brighter, and it's so worth it. But here's the deal. That house is gonna, our taxes are gonna continue to go up. That house is gonna continue to need fixing. We're gonna wanna live there, and we've put a lot of money into it, but eventually we're not gonna be able to afford to live there. We're gonna have to move, because we can't afford to keep that house up. And I kind of think we deserve a little bit of a break, because we've put so much into it, and I know the whole street has benefited from it, and we get a lot of comments on our home because of all the stuff that we do, and we're really proud of it. And we're not loaded, but that's where we decide to spend our money. The second part of this is I read, it's a burden on the staff to be able to administer this. And I can understand that, and I can appreciate it. But there's a lot of help in this town. There's a historic preservation society, and those, or council commission. Folks on that commission can volunteer to help. Homeowners who are affected by this would volunteer to help to administer it and figure it out. There's examples all up and down the state. We're not starting from square one. As a homeowner, I would be happy to sit on a subcommittee or a commission to help bring the Mills Act in town. I think everyone would participate. And again, as other folks have shown, it really takes a village. And I think there's enough incentive here by homeowners and other neighbors who appreciate what these homeowners are doing, and the town to understand that, this is a beautiful jewel of a town, and we want to continue to let it shine. And I think these are exactly the kinds of programs that the whole community could get behind. And me, as an individual homeowner, would really appreciate the break. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. So that's the last speaker card that I have. If anybody else wants to speak, now is your chance. If not, I will close the public hearing. We'll move to the council for discussion and or motion. Vice Mayor.
I just had a question. I think it was Ms. Summers said that monies would be used for tiles, landscaping, awnings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My question is, if I am receiving an individual property tax break, what requirement, if any, is there for me to put that money into the historic property? And if there is a requirement, how is it monitored?
There is a very strict requirement. It's typically a 10-year rolling tax program. So basically, when an individual homeowner comes forward and requests a contract, they have to provide a 10-year work plan in terms of what are all the investments that they're going to make. So maybe year one is the tile, maybe year two is the roof, year three is the chimney, whatever it is. And then because it's rolling, they have to continue to add projects to the list. I don't believe landscaping and awnings, we'd have to look at that more carefully. It's not just this is how I'm going to get my new refrigerator and appliances and that sort of thing. And that's why, it needs to be monitored.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. A follow-up. Does my work plan, so let's say the chart that was up, I get $11,286. I provide a work plan for year one, I'm spending $11,286, not $10,000, $11,286.
At least.
And so who monitors this? What happens if they don't spend it? Am I prosecuting someone? Am I taking their money away? Am I sending staff out? Is next door saying Joe Blow got a property tax break and is not putting it on his house?
So those are all the things that are in the staff report that these three council members, if we move forward, would be discussing, what the penalties are, what the fines would be, what the process would be, whether it be criminal prosecution, how many contracts are let. Just a few other comments that were made also is that there was the reference from the study from the San Diego University that determined that there was a net neutral, and I found that research and provided it to them. At the same time, that same research, though, the grand jury for San Diego 2008 determined, and I can read this to you, the designation leads to a significant and growing loss of tax revenues for the city via the Mills Act property tax reassessment. The criterion processes for historical designations are far too lax, and there are insufficient personnel to regularly inspect designated properties to ensure that they are being preserved in accordance with the Department of Interior standards. These deficiencies are magnified when it comes to historical districts. This report's about 25 pages. I can provide that to you, but that's why we need to make certain, if we're going to move forward, that this program is very specific. And I think there's a perception that because you have a historical home, you're automatically going to qualify and get a contract. Each contract comes in front of you. The council's the one that would approve that. The program for the 10-year period would be approved by council. Campbell has 8 right now. They're only going to go to 10, and they're going to shut it off. No more allowed. Saratoga only has 3. If you look at jurisdictions our size, I can't find one that has more than 10 contracts. So the idea that this is going to benefit a tremendous amount of historical homes in the town is not necessarily correlates with my research.
Okay, thank you. My final question then is the bottom line that whatever enforcement and monitoring has to be done by the town at the town's expense.
Correct.
Councilmember Sayak.
So I'm asking all these questions because, as you know, the devil's in the details. Ms. Zarnowitz, you were singled out. So I'm curious, Berkeley, San Jose, I know San Jose is large. Berkeley, if you could just walk us through, it sounds like the contracts come specifically to the council. They decide how many. Do they come in at once and then they choose the 10? Like, how does one decide which contracts to honor and then which projects within those contracts to match up with the tax savings?
So I don't have an updated.
Okay.
But in 2008, Berkeley had 7 contracts, and yes, they have an ordinance, and yes, they have a certified local government program. The list of all of those in 2008, I haven't updated. The majority all have ordinances, and as a municipal lawyer, I would say you must enact an ordinance. I'm not going to rely on I believe, a layperson that works with the state on saying you don't need an ordinance. But there are a few that do not. But I would absolutely recommend, the list on here goes on, and 90% of them require it. But as of 2008, Berkeley had 7.
So in either Berkeley or San Jose, was it a staff per se, or could we utilize our Historic Preservation Commission in doing some of this review and some of this work? I'm just curious if you could give us a flavor of how those cities utilize the program. Not to say that we're going to follow it, but I'm having trouble understanding this.
Yeah, so it's an application. It would be an annual. Every year, there's a certain number of applications that come forward. They're usually reviewed. They're reviewed by the Historic Preservation Committee or Commission to make sure that the homes, first of all, or properties are historic, because some of them are designated and some of them aren't. In San Jose, actually, the property has to be a city landmark, so it has to qualify at the highest level. In Berkeley, it could be at a lower level. But then there's, as Ms. Pavetti said, there's the whole work plan with a detail of what work would happen every year in order to spend all the money that the property owner is saving. And it goes through, from the commission to the council. The council reviews it, and ultimately, because the council, the city signs the contract. It's a contract between the town and the owner. And then that all gets recorded with the county, and the assessor calculates the tax savings.
And then every year, whoever is monitoring the program, which is typically a staff person, they review all the contracts. They do a site visit to verify what was done last year, what are you going to do this year. So it is staff intensive. It's possible to put together a fee for those services. So it could be cost recovery, but then we would essentially be creating a new line of business for the town.
So I'm going to call on myself just to follow up on what Mrs. Arnowitz and Ms. Pavetti said. So let's assume that, the majority of these homes, as Ms. Kapin-Jave described, need a lot of work. And they're going to come to the town with, a $500,000 to $1 million proposal. They got to jack it up. They got to put in a new foundation. They want to restore the whole thing to its vintage grandeur, right? I think something like that, we're going to have a whole myriad of applications and planning applications and building permits and things issued already. So it'd be kind of like you can track it all at one time. It's not like someone's going to come year after year, I'm going to replace the bathtub this year, and next year I'm going to fix this posts. I mean, I could see how that may be tedious, but the moral of the story here is that it would be, the council gets to set the parameters through the advice of the historical committee. We can make this thing as complicated and as cantankerous as we want, or we can make it very easy. And it seems like the discussion is, well, it's going to be so much work. But the reality is, Montessorino has it. Montessorino has a B ordinance that we're borrowing, and we got that thing coming up on our agenda pretty quickly in about 6 months. So I don't understand why we'd be so afraid to, approach this, or at least keep an open mind towards it. I'm going to call on Councilmember Spector, or Councilmember Sayak. Councilmember Spector's not there.
Just so, again, I want to understand process. Tonight is just a discussion so that staff understands if there's even interest, and it has to be unanimous interest. One of the key things that I've mentioned already, I understand the intent, just speaking right now. I appreciate the intent, I can support it, but I want to make sure I understand the unintended consequences. We still have to notify all the agencies that are affected by that. So to have that discussion and to actually have that communication with all the district agencies that receive it requires unanimous decision to move forward. Is that correct?
Yes, really, we're looking for a yes, no. I think, clearly historic preservation is a wonderful element to Los Gatos. We're really blessed with all the investment that our homeowners have given and our commercial property owners have given to what they already own, and it's wonderful. And I think there's a lot of different ways to achieve our historic preservation goals. I think we just want to make sure that as we consider the Mills Act as one of those options, that kind of what all the steps are. And that if we do institute it, we are essentially creating a new line of business, that CDD will most likely have either a vendor contract who's going to be administering this, or there'll be a staff person or a part-time staff person who will need to be doing the monitoring, because it's a commitment. We're making a contract for 10 years, and we need to be able to uphold our side of that contract. And we need to be able to report every year to the state what we've done, et cetera. So it is workload. So I don't want our expression of workload to be perceived as being opposition. We just want you to be eyes wide open as you think of all the other things that you might want to accomplish here in the town with your staff resources. We just want you to be eyes wide open.
And I guess I would put it this way, is two of the three council members tonight can direct staff to do whatever it desires. What I don't want to see is have staff, if there's a council member that doesn't need to see any more information and knows that they're opposed to the Mills Act, to continue down that path, because at the end of the game, you're going to need all three of you to vote on the ordinance to move forward on this. And so but technically, yes, two out of the three can direct staff to do further research, do further information, and to bring that back. Just understanding that, I hate to go down that path if in fact we're not even going to get there in the end.
Okay. And one more. And again, it's process oriented. Ms. Privetta, you talk about all the competing interests, and I understand it's a priority. We've stated that, but we've also stated sustainability and building affordable housing as priorities. So I want to understand, should we decide there's more information and staff has to do that, in January when we do our priority setting, how does that work when you have the entire council, all five of us, trying to decide the work plan for next year?
It will already be on there.
But there's so many things on there. And so if I want to get things done next year, understanding that, there's a certain amount of staff time.
Yes, it would already be on there. Mine will come as to which ones are the most important by state mandates. And council could change the priority list on that, but it certainly would be on the priority list because of this group.
Okay, so if I understand January, then it would just be where on the list all these different programs would fall, and the five of us would be deciding that.
I would have to do more research. They might have to be excused from that discussion on whether to move it from a different place, but I'm not certain. I don't know the answer to that question. But it's already going to be a priority because you've given it. The majority here has given that priority. Where that falls in, no, I don't believe it could be moved by the rest of the council.
Okay.
Vice Mayor?
Okay, a couple. The majority is 3, correct? Even to put it up for consideration for priorities in January, correct? Okay. I just wanted to ask, I guess, Mr. Schultz, compare and contrast the Williamson Act. So Williamson Act is a tax break for agricultural properties. I declare that I'm going to use my property as agriculture, and I get a tax break. And it's a 10-year contract, and it's entered into with the town. But at least from my experience in dealing with it, it does not have regulatory parameters. It doesn't have inspection parameters. It doesn't have, I'm going to buy 10 sacks of hay kind of parameters. So how, why, et cetera, is the Mills Act different? I'm assuming that all the regulatory implementation framework is embedded into the law,
That's
as
correct.
opposed to the Williamson Act.
That's correct.
Okay,
There's
so
no-
we can't just say, we're approving your plan for your historic house, and that checks off the box for our Mills Act.
No, and that's, if you look at that grand jury, that's what was happening. They were just checking the box and not doing the follow-up to see that there was actual historical preservation going on.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just going to jump in here and make some, share some of my stream of consciousness. I've sat up here for a good many years, and we've debated whether we should have a leaf blower ordinance, or whether we should fix our fence ordinance, or whether we should allow people to smoke in our downtown ordinance. These are all quality of life ordinances, and the town is here to provide services to our residences. And we want our residents to have the best quality of life available on the planet. That's my job. I want to return that value to this community. Everything we do is work, whether it's a B ordinance or you name it, it's all work. I look at our opportunity this evening is to allow another tool in our toolbox that the residents could possibly use. I don't anticipate there's going to be some kind of bum rush on the Treasury and everyone's going to get such a tremendous tax break and, it's going to bankrupt the school or anything like that. I mean, if you do the math, if 10 people did this in the next 10 years, it could cost 2 school districts $44,000. But if you divide that by 2, it's $22,000. But the value of the properties around might be brought up more than that. But the real issue is it gives the residents a tool that they can use. It's a tool that they want. It's a tool that other communities have. Let them figure out if they want to use it, how they're going to use it, according to whatever parameters we may put forth going forward. But to essentially deny them something that they're asking us for, and all of these other surrounding, Saratoga, Campbell, Monte Sereno have it, and we're sitting here after all these years, after our '89 earthquake, we don't have this thing. It represents a question like, why? Why has it gone all these years? And I can't come up with a good answer to that, but I can come up with the answer that if there's 3 of us sitting here tonight, maybe our job isn't to think so much of, as Councilmember Sayoc said, the devil in the details, because we can sit here and talk ourselves out of anything. And we've done it many times on this dais. We should maybe consider saying, hey, let's put this thing forward, and we'll figure out the details that the community desires later. We can make it worth everyone's while, I think. We can make it worth staff's while. We can make it worth the community's while. We can make it worth the residents' while, and put forth a really well thought out version of the Mills Act according to how we would like to see it tailored. And like I said, maybe people will use it, maybe people won't. But the residents who would like to use it or like to explore using it for whatever their rationale may be, maybe it's replacing the toilet that you pull the cord way up here, I don't know. Let them figure out how to use it. But the reality of the matter is we would be giving our residents an opportunity to use a tool that has been enacted since 1972 at the state of California. And like, as Vice Mayor just mentioned, the Williamson Act or whatever, yes, all these acts are out there. All these things exist for reasons, and it's because the people want them. It's not because we want them. We're fortunate enough to be the 3 up here who get to decide that tonight. But quite honestly, my vote isn't for myself. It's because I had members from the community come out here and tell me that they wanted this. I didn't have anybody come in here tonight and tell me that this was a bad idea and we shouldn't do it. So, putting on my non-biased hat, I'm listening to what the public is saying this evening. So I am going to make a motion that we go with the recommendation to move this forward to consider drafting a future ordinance. If anybody wants to make a second. Councilmember Sayoc?
Before I want some information, when before I make a decision, one of the things I really want to be mindful is what do our partners that receive property tax feel about this? And because I heard from staff that there's no direct communication, I would be comfortable moving this, having this, asking staff to have the discussion with our property tax partners, and for that information to come back.
And thank you, Councilmember Sack. I'd like to respond to that. We serve this jurisdiction, and I understand we are all partners in the community, whether it's the fire department or the school districts or whoever gets a little piece of the action with the property taxes. But we are here to decide on behalf of the Los Gatos residents who live under the body that we were elected by them to legislate under. I would not want any part of my decision to be based upon, if I was sitting on the school board and somebody came and said, adopt the Mills Act, I would have to listen to what they were saying. But I'm not on the school board, so I would not make my decision based on any other agencies because I serve on this agency and I represent the people in this audience who came forward. So that's how I am viewing this. I would view your comments as, I appreciate them, but I would overall be hesitant to consider that based on my, not representing those organizations. This is a state law, and this state law says what it says, and we are here to serve under the Constitution of the state. We raise our right hand, and we are here to serve the people who are in our audience here that are the residents of the town under this jurisdiction of the Los Gatos Town Council. So I do appreciate that, but my motion is predicated on the fact that I would vote this through, and perhaps those things could be discussed at a later time. But when you involve too many other organizations and bodies, they're going to come forward and say, huh, what, how much is it? 44,000, 2 school districts, I don't know. And it will just perpetuate the discussion for a long time, and I don't think that's really our purview. So, do we have a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Any other motions, or we just go home? Vice Mayor?
I may save motions by what I'm going to say. I appreciate that all of you are interested in moving forward with adopting an act that's been on the books in California and available to Los Gatos for 47 years. The town has a lovely historic district and recovered, downtown district, and recovered after the earthquake without the Mills Act. It has a historic preservation committee. It has historic ordinances. It has historic guidelines. And it has done a really good job of maintaining its historic properties throughout the 47 years that the Mills Act has been in existence. Mayor Leonardis talked about representing the people in this room. As a council person, all of us should be representing everyone who lives in Los Gatos. Everyone in Los Gatos does not have a historic property. Everyone in Los Gatos does not benefit from this. Mayor mentioned leaf blowers and smoking. They come at no cost to the town and benefit everyone. Ms. Summers said we might lose a few tax dollars. Yet if you, any of you in the audience, I think a couple of you have come to a lot of our council meetings. For example, every year we hand out grants. We have a total available to us of $170,000, I think it is, or $120,000, which is just over the amount that we would lose, according to the chart that was brought up, to spend on those programs. People ask for $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. The Chamber of Commerce asks us for $20,000. If we lose $112,000 a year, we don't have that money. And it's not going to fire, it's not going to police, it's not going to schools, which can benefit everyone. You talked about construction costs. If I don't live in a historic house, my construction costs have gone up. I still have to maintain that house, and if somebody makes their house nicer in my non-historic district, my property taxes can go up. So I appreciate that it's a benefit to those who own historic properties. But as Ms. Kaplan-Javi said, she made the choice to buy that house, and she appreciates putting her money into it to make it nice. And that's a personal decision that she makes for her. Now, maybe it benefits her neighborhood, just like if I fix up my house, it benefits my neighborhood. The property taxes go up if I keep it in good repair. So the problem that I have is that this is something that's specific to a particular set of property owners, not necessarily a benefit to the entire town. And while I appreciate you in the audience are shaking your heads and don't like what I'm saying, as an elected member of the council, I'm representing 30,000 people who don't get this benefit. And so in order to maintain those property tax revenues, in order to make sure that we are going, and I haven't even mentioned the fact that 4 out of the 5 council members have a direct legal conflict, and that this is not by no means an emergency. We're not dealing with something where the state says you have to do something right away. We're not having to enact something. We are making a discretionary choice to consider an item that has a direct potential financial benefit for 4 of the 5 council people. So we should step back and think about that. Shouldn't we be doing this at a time where people who are not conflicted can make this decision? And because we are not in any way, shape, or form in an emergency situation. We've been in this situation for 47 years and have struggled through. So given that, I mean, I don't want to discount the value of the historic properties. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the choices that people make and the investments they make, and they do benefit the town. But I don't want to allow that benefit to go forward at the expense of the rest of us for services, frankly, that can benefit all of us: pension benefits, school benefits, fire benefits, the other things that we've mentioned, public open space. These are all supported by property taxes, and they're supported at large, not by one individual who's getting a break. So I appreciate that this is an incentive for owners. It's an incentive that I think that the town doesn't need to adopt. I think a better approach is looking at all of our historic codes. One of you stood up and said they're not working. Well, let's see how we can make them work, because we have them in place. So rather than a financial incentive, let's see if we can streamline and eliminate some fees that go into it. Let's see if we can eliminate some review. Let's see if we can streamline that with a council that's all qualified to vote on that, that is not conflicted. So for that reason, I'm not going to support going forward.
I will respond to some of the points that the Vice Mayor made. I think the part about the math, which Mr. Huizenga brought forward, was that our property taxes for the last 7 years have been going up $1.2 million a year. But if we had 10 homes that were about 1.8 million, and we only got, I think it was about, it was $10,000 collectively for 10 homes. So the comparison was made that this would only cost the town $10,000 in our property tax hit in a town where the property taxes are going up $1.2 million a year. So it was quite insignificant. So to use the loss of revenue as an argument, to me, doesn't appear to be a strong argument for ourselves. I think the idea of it benefiting the town is, if you're able to, as Ms. Catherine Summers brought forward, preserve the old Greyhound bus terminal. And as long as I've been living here, I remember those green tile, and I think it should stay that way. And if that owner is incentivized to keep it that way and keep the charm, that brings people into our community to spend money, to shop here, to want to hang out here, to enjoy our community. And that will bring up the whole community, and that will bring up more tax revenue probably than the small amount that the town would be giving up. When it comes to waiting for the opportune time when there are council members who do not have a conflict, well, that's why we drew straws, because unfortunately, I believe that being that a good majority of our town has historic homes in it, we will always have council members that are going to be conflicted. And, you know, it's very much likely that there will be at least 2 or 3 council members at all times that will live in the Almond Grove or live downtown or live off of Edelin Avenue or own another property that may be considered historic. I mean, it's anything after 1941. In Mr. Rennie's case, he lives in a neighborhood. He lives in a newer home, but he's within 500 feet of a historic. So we're always going to have an inopportune time or an inopportune council elected body, potentially. When it comes to representing all of the people of Los Gatos, well, that's what we do. If I misspoke, I meant to say the majority of the speakers who came here tonight, they were all in favor. Nobody spoke against. But yes, we do represent the whole town. And by representing the whole town, I look at this as an economic incentive. It's another tool that will bring up our town. We get so much criticized, oh, the downtown is this and that, and it's falling behind. Well, look at the communities around us that have seemed to come up. Saratoga, Campbell, they have this tool. We do not have this tool. So I do appreciate what the Vice Mayor said about looking at some more of the historic codes and regulations and things and offering some potential incentives, maybe on permit fees and application fees. But keep in mind, we'll have a conflict because 4 of the 5 council members might have a conflict voting on those things moving forward. In addition, how much administrative work will that create the council as well? So I don't want to be the person up here who is totally soapboxing this. I'm just trying to bring some perspective that I think this is just another tool. It's an insignificant cost. The amount of staff work is to be determined. We could make this simple. We could make it very difficult. I think we would err on the idea of simple, but bringing it forward because the people want it, not because the council wants it, not because we're conflicted. The people that I heard want it. And I put it on the agenda as is the mayor's purview because the people came to me and they said they wanted it. So it was not part of our strategic goals. It was brought forth by the people on 2 or 3 occasions. And I feel like all we are here really tonight to decide is, should we move the concept forward to adopt the ordinance so to direct staff to look into this so the council could vote on it in the future of how it would be implemented. It's not really to find a myriad of reasons why it isn't a good thing. I'm ambivalent. I want to see more information. I like to see it being offered as a tool for the people because the people came forward. Any more discussion? Again, I'll make a motion. We'll try it again. I want to see this move forward. I move that we adopt an ordinance to adopt a Future Mills Act. Do we have a second? Councilmember Sayoc.
So again, Mr. Mayor, I think there's no ordinance that to be discussed. I think that that's what needs to move forward is what's the discussion. And my concern that I mentioned earlier is we have not reached out to those partners that will be affected by this. Again, this isn't to bring naysayers, but if I were in a position where another agency were going to make a decision that may impact my funds and my budgetary authority to do programming, I would expect the other agency to give me that respect of notifying me and letting me comment. We have significant issues upcoming. One of them is fire safety. And yes, it may be just $44,000 that may affect the fire district, but I need to know beforehand What are the consequences of the fire district removing $44,000 from their budget? These are hypothetical numbers, first of all. I want to know from the school district, what will happen if we remove a certain amount of money from them? I see no harm in asking the question. And again, yes, we represent the town. These are our decisions. But I would expect someone in my position to reach out to me and ask me my opinion on matters that may affect my future funding and my future programming. So I'm willing to move this forward by having staff begin conversations, but without understanding the full consequences of giving 10-year contracts that may affect 10-year contracting for income, for tax breaks, I can't decide on what an ordinance should even look like.
So I think what I'd like to do is to continue this item, and we'll get some more information from staff. I'm going to ask that we move to continue it, so I'll make a motion. And the direction would be, let's find out what the basis points are for the districts, whether it be the open space, whether it be the fire, whether it be the school district, on a hypothetical situation of up to 10 homes at $2 million per year. According to the data that we saw in the meeting, it was 1.8, but we'll round it up to $2 million. And also, it would be nice to see examples of our surrounding jurisdictions' ordinances and what they are doing, bring those forward, so this council can make an informed decision, because I feel like what we are lacking here is information to decide. We're not trying to put any other agencies at a disadvantage, but there's a reason why everybody else is doing this. So I think if we can get that information, we can make a better informed decision. So I have a motion. Do we have a second?
I would support that motion.
Further discussion? Vice Mayor?
I don't have a discussion.
Okay. So do we get a clear motion, staff? Okay. I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
So the motion passes 2-1, where we will continue with more information. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for...
Excuse me.
Vice
sorry.
Mayor.
Does this need to be continued to a date certain or just on whenever?
Yeah, we're going to have to look at this in light of our other work priorities, because all the consultation with the various tax receiving agencies is quite a bit of work. And we would need to make sure that our communication is neutral, and, so we would have a fair amount of work just to think about how we have that conversation. We can certainly start gathering ordinances, et cetera, and I would recommend that we continue this actually to strategic priorities.
I'm going to make one comment in response to that. I mean, we know what the breakdowns are. We get the pie chart. We know what everyone's percentages are. So we can basically take the example with the $2 million and figure out, based on 10 examples, exactly what the hits would be. So we can do a lot of the legwork for those agencies.
So,
Mr. Schultz?
So we certainly can do that. I just want to point out that the chart that was given to you was based on the market value of homes, and that's not the way the Mills Act works. It's based on assessed value of the home, and then there's a capitalization value that you have to plug into that. So one of the things the staff report didn't do is we didn't even use finance department to do all those calculations. So what you're really asking is the financial impact, not only on the town for these homes, but also from the other agencies. And that will take some collaboration with the other agencies to understand what their position is. But yes, there'll be much more graphs, and we can provide you with Campbell and Saratoga and other ordinances and programs, so you can see the length of those programs and where they're at right now.
That would be fantastic.
Palo Alto is right now going through a huge revitalization of their program because they couldn't get anybody to do their program, because for one example is if you're actually going to take advantage of this property tax savings, they require that you have to have open houses to allow people to come into your houses to see the improvements, and most people didn't like that, so they would refuse to participate in it. But many towns and cities have that requirement, so that again is another program thing that you will have to decide.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Procedural question. Ms. Pavetti, you suggested bringing this forward to our January priority setting session. And so that's normally something that's done by all 5 council members. But given that the motion was to continue this hearing, doesn't it then have to continue as a separate question?
It probably does, actually, so thank you for that correction. I think, I'm just trying to think of the staff who are available to create the analysis, make those high-touch contacts with the appropriate people in the agencies, probably at my level, CEO level of our partner agencies. And we just want to be thoughtful because we want to make sure that we do this in a neutral way so that way they are able to provide objective responses to the council.
Councilmember Sayoc?
So understanding the staff burden this could play, a lot of the presenters mentioned that many of our surrounding neighbors utilize this. And I'm wondering if before any preparation has to happen, can you have the conversation, if they're familiar with the Mills Act, they're familiar with what it entails, how that affects and so can you have a higher level conversation without necessarily preparing graphs and getting into financial information? What I want to know is, what is the impact to them? Do they have strong reactions? Perhaps they don't, but we won't know until we ask. And I want to see if there's an opportunity to have that conversation without asking you to do all this work.
First questions are going to be, well, it depends on your program. Are you going to have only 3 contracts like Saratoga and cap it at 3 and have no more than 3 homes? And are you capping the assessed value? Or are you going to allow this to be 800? We have 2,000 homes that are defined as historical structures, or over 2,000. Are you going to allow 2,000 homes? So, what's the process you're going to go through? That's probably going to be a lot of their questions before they just know, what the process is. But we could have those preliminary conversations with them. But I would not rely on the graph that was up there because it actually is a much more complicated formula.
Understood. And using that example right there, if 3 contracts is where we seem to get minimal bristles, then that information should be shared with us. And maybe that feeds into how many contracts this council looks at. I just want to have a conversation.
And I think that's what we do. I mean, we can start by saying that, that Campbell has it. The first time I heard Montecito, I knew Campbell had it, I knew Saratoga has it, I know Palo Alto has it, but I've never heard that Montecito, so we'll check on them. And that's the question to ask. Have you seen a decrease in your property taxes based on these other 3 cities and towns from the school districts from where they are? And that's the conversation we'll have.
I also have a question. It's really up to us what percentages we allow as well. We set the parameters. So we don't have to give 90% or whatever, we can choose a higher percentage. So, looking what our neighbors are doing would be logical. And I think my original motion said 10 properties. I said about $2 million, 10. That's the information we're looking for. So I'm not asking
Mayor,
for 800.
If I could, just, given the conversation, I'd like to try to ease the burden of the conversation. And so open-ended, finding out what our districts are already experiencing with their cities that have these. I think that would be information that would be helpful to us without necessarily asking our own staff to prepare much work, whether it's these 10 hypotheticals at 2 million. Do you agree with that?
I would agree, and I would think that staff had already that step had already taken place. We're here to talk about this tonight, and unfortunately, it wasn't. That's why we're continuing it. So, thank you.
I provide you as attachment 2 the different assessed. If your property was assessed at $500,000, what that tax break would be, all the way up to $3 million.
Mm-hmm.
So those are in there, and you can see where the tax break increases as the assessed value goes up.
Thank you. All right, I think that concludes our meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We are adjourned.